Imagine that you are at a dinner party with a group of friends, and you casually make a joke around the lines of this. You say something like, I'm not really a math person, or I hate math, or I'm not really that good at math. Now imagine that you're in the same exact room with the same exact folks, and instead you say something like, you know, I really can't read, or I don't like reading, or I don't like words. How would those people treat you differently? They'd probably stop in their tracks, look at you in disgust and shock, and then after that dinner party, I'm sure they would arrange some type of intervention to improve your literacy skills. Identities, this seems very trivial, but identities are an extremely powerful force in our lives. We have multiple identities. We're mothers, we're fathers, college professors, soccer fanatics, we're police officers, knitters, and sisters. Our identities help us navigate through the world, but they also, a lot of times, determine our trajectory. A former Google data scientist actually analyzed Google searches, and he found some pretty scary things. But one of the things he found was actually parents' biases against their daughters. So parents, in their heart of hearts, believe that they treat their sons and daughters exactly the same and want the same opportunities for them. But their Google searches prove otherwise. So I'm gonna play a game with you guys. What do you think the top search results, or the top searches for parents with sons are? Can't hear you guys, a little louder. Video games?
Science camp.
Science camp for my son? Entomology, right? that could be right, actually. Is my son gifted? Now, let's see what the top searches for parents with sons or daughters are. What do you think it is? Wedding, my daughter wedding. What did you use? Beauty? Yeah, something along those lines. Is my daughter overweight? Yeah, this is 2018, y'all, okay? And even with all the advances that we think we have in gender equality and civil rights, we still value boys for their intellect, and we value girls by the way that they look. And even when the boy's intellect actually doesn't stand up to par. In Tel Aviv University, researchers actually uncovered that elementary teachers, and even if they were female elementary teachers, tended to overestimate and overpraise the math abilities of their male students and underestimate the abilities of their female students when it came to math. Even when through blind grading, they found that a lot of girls actually did better on their math tests than those boys did. That followed those students throughout their academic careers, and they found that later, those girls were less likely to take high-level science and math courses, while obviously the opposite happened for those boys. And again, those girls are actually pretty good at math and better than their male counterparts. We find this at our monthly hackathon. So every month we have a hackathon, and if we do not label a hackathon an all-girls hackathon, parents will not sign their daughters up for the event. And when we do label a hackathon an all-girls hackathon, I'll have at least one parent come up to me, usually a mom, and she'll say, oh, I see you're having an all-girls hackathon. When are you gonna have an all-boys? And I say, I keep my calm as much as possible, and I say, well, by default, our hackathons are all-boy hackathons. So we need to have these all-girls hackathons, otherwise our parents won't sign up their daughters for this event. Of course, they look back at me in shock, and that definitely sends a big shock through their system. So these are the biases that our daughters face and our girls face each and every day. And it slowly chips away at their STEM identity. So how can we expect girls to automatically want, or our children in general, to automatically want to be a part of STEM, when every time that opportunity is presented to them, we've already made that decision for them? I remember when I was in high school, I actually played around with my parents' computers and software programs. They also had books on the shelf on how to build a website or intro to HTML. And so I would actually play around and teach myself very rudimentary websites. But when it came to actually choosing in high school between a C++ elective class and an accounting class, and literally these classes were down the hall for each other, so I would look at both of these classes. It was a literal fork in the road. And I ended up choosing the accounting class because when I looked in that C++ classroom, I was not very comfortable with the teacher who didn't look like me, and I could tell I wouldn't be comfortable with that student base as well. So it wasn't until about a decade later, when I ended up in finance in New York, that I got swept into that whole Silicon Alley movement in NYC. So a lot of opportunities opened up for people just to learn about coding and computer science. So I literally took every single class I could take. I took in front and back end web development. I took classes at General Assembly, School of Visual Arts. There was this cool place called Third Ward in Brooklyn. And I also attended as many tech meetup groups as I could, including Girl Develop It. So finally, I had a community and a place where I could feel super comfortable to actually ask questions, explore my interests, and also not feel stupid asking those questions, right? So I decided to go ahead and take my newfound excitement and give back to kids and girls who look like me, honestly. And I found that even though these programs for middle and high school students were amazing, the kids were getting the concepts, and they were getting really good at it, I realized that I was hearing that same old rhetoric that I thought we had left behind a long time ago. I heard the girls and the kids saying things like, oh, I can't major in computer science because I'm not that good at math, or I'm not a science person, or I'm not really technical. So even though those kids were good at the content, they understood the concepts, they still had that inkling of self-doubt that really was holding them back. So our kids are getting more access to STEM opportunities. I have at least a parent come to me every week talking about their new coding program at their school or their new robotics club. But we're missing a really critical piece because we're missing we need to make sure that our kids actually believe that they can and participate in these fields and that they'll be really good at it. So research actually shows that there's this thing called STEM identity. And they find that for kids of color and girls, that being the smartest kid in your class isn't enough to convince them to go into a STEM field. They have to believe in their STEM identity, that they can participate and do well in that field. They have to believe that I'm a math person, or I'm good at science, or I'm good at technology. And without that, they'll choose otherwise. So at Page and Paxton, we actually have a way to measure STEM identity in children. So we use this widely accepted instrument called a Draw a Scientist and Draw an Engineer test, where researchers just ask the question of students. They say, can you draw for me what a scientist doing science looks like, or an engineer doing engineering looks like? And the reason why drawing is really key is because sometimes our kids can't communicate those complex ideas that they have about science and engineering. And this is particularly good for young children and oftentimes English language learners. So just to give you an idea of how important STEM identity is, I love to tell the story of Zora. So Zora was in our summer program, our STEM program, about 2 years ago. And before we started the program, we actually asked all the students, can you draw for me a scientist doing science? So Zora drew what most of us think when we think about a scientist, is the typical Caucasian male mad scientist. Equipped with glasses, crazy hair, a lab coat, and there's like weird things growing out of God knows what in the lab. 5 weeks later, Zora drew this picture right here. She drew an African-American woman, which is very much to her liking as well. She's wearing a really pretty dress. She has real living things around her called plants, and she actually defined a specific type of scientist. Can't quite tell, but she's writing botanist. Okay. Since then, Zora has actually participated in 2 science fairs at her school. She's built model cities at home using civil engineering concepts that we work with our kids and their parents on through virtual learning and online learning. We've also had Zora participate in our STEM Make-a-thons. She also went to our All-Girls Hackathon a month ago. So she's been exploring a lot of different types of STEM, and her family is all the way behind her and supportive. So what Zora's story tells us is that not only are we responsible for the way our children perceive themselves and their abilities in STEM, but we actually can change the way that they view themselves in STEM. Because what I found through dealing with this complex educational system is that actually changing the trajectory of a generation doesn't require a super expensive, complex implementation or program. It involves these very small decisions that we make each and every day. The small decisions that we make for ourselves, for our children, and for our students. We need to check our implicit and our gender bias, realizing what we encourage in some students and children and discourage in others. When you see a room full of kids of color engaging in a really fun STEM program, don't assume that they're an underserved group of students or that that program is less rigorous. When you see a coding program and you're trying to decide whether to enroll your daughter or your son in the coding program, enroll them both. Because don't assume that your son's gonna love it, but your daughter's gonna hate it. Because 90% of today's jobs require some type of technical aptitude or STEM aptitude. So these are not the jobs of tomorrow. These are actually the jobs of today. And guess what? Workforce development begins at the age of 3. Our STEM pipeline is extremely leaky. And guess what? If we don't shore up that hole, we're all going down with the ship. Because it's not just an underserved problem, this is not just a girl problem or a people of color problem. This is our problem in our nation. Because we want to make sure that every single person is able to participate and grow and thrive in this ever-changing 21st century economy. Thank you.